have to make. And in particular, I look forward to these conversations to help me make more informed decisions. Okay, well, welcome to this month's open house, a conversation with the candidates. 23 years ago, almost to the day, I stood on the stage at the National Heritage Museum to open up the first of these public forums, and boldly and courageously and optimistically announced it was the beginning of a series. Here we are 23 years later, and I'm announcing tonight that this is actually not only the anniversary, the 23rd anniversary, it's also the first in the 24th series, which will continue in the fall. So, come back from where? I'm thrilled to be in the position I'm in this evening and not in this position. But thank all five of you very much for your willingness to be here tonight, and actually more importantly for your willingness to run, to serve us. I certainly understand what that takes, and I appreciate your stepping forward to do it. Just so everybody knows the format for the evening, I'll go through in a second, but first I want you to know that what shapes the conversation tonight are these cards. So if you have a question that you would like to ask and haven't yet submitted it, just raise your hand. We've got cards and pencils. We also have a lot of cards already, but we will get to as many of these as we can. The questions are being sorted both by my staff and by Minuteman Indivisible and a representative of the Democratic Town Committee of Lexington. They will give me a series of questions. I will endeavor to ask them in the shortest possible form so we don't take up a lot of time with that, and also to allow the candidates to speak on a whole range of issues so that we try to touch as many topics tonight as we possibly can in the next hour and a half or so. The format that the candidates have agreed to is an opening statement of 90 seconds. We will then begin a round of questions. I will ask a question, and a different person will be the first person to speak in each of those, for each of the first 5 questions. The first respondent will get 90 seconds to answer the question. The others will get a minute to either respond to that opening statement or make that opening response or offer one of their own. We will keep going like that till everybody's had a chance to be the first respondent, so in order to be entirely fair. And then there'll be a brief period of time when each of the candidates will get a second bite at the apple. Anything they thought to say after the fact or didn't get to say, they'll have another minute to fill in the blanks on the first series of questions. They will then get 30 seconds to ask a question of each other. So each candidate will ask a question, and the 4 others in the race will get to respond. And then we're going to come back and do another round of your questions until we run out of time. And for the last 5 minutes, the candidates get a minute each to make a closing statement. So those are the rules of engagement that they agreed to. We've got a crack timekeeping team in the middle of the room. I have a gavel. And I also have an invitation to the 5 of you to not use up all the time that you have. The briefer you are, the more questions we can get to. So you can reject that invitation, but I had to extend it. Last thing I want to do before we start, I'm sorry we have run out of seats, but don't call the fire department because there's 1 seat here. We have a seat. 2 seats here. We've probably exceeded the allowable number of people in the room, so don't ask. I just saw the fire chief at another event, so I know he's busy. The last thing I want to say is that I've invited the candidates in their opening statements to ignore the socially correct thing to do, which is thank you for being here and thank me for hosting this. I've invited them to ignore that so that they can use all the time for an opening statement. So I hope you consider yourselves thanked for being here. I certainly thank you, and I know they do. and all the thanks I need for doing this is your presence here tonight. So I'm glad you're here. So with that, we will begin. Yeah, I think we're set to begin. Michelle, you get the floor for your opening remark. By the way, you're free to stand or sit as you like.
I guess Narayan wants me to stand. My entire professional life has been dedicated to public service, both working and volunteering to improve communities here and across the Commonwealth. I'm a 2-term Lexington selectman. After graduate school, I went to work as the assistant town administrator in Hudson. I discovered early on that I am driven by a strong desire to solve problems, help people, and make collective progress toward a better future. What motivates me is the opportunity to change the dialogue and help our state and communities make better choices. Take a look at my accomplishments and the areas I've focused on, and you will see a clear track record. I care deeply and work hard for our youth, our seniors, our disadvantaged residents, our environment, our mobility, economic opportunity, public safety, and mental and physical health. I believe in the power of government to do good. But more importantly, I believe that it is our moral responsibility to advance social equity. I've spent 25 years building statewide relationships, working with just about every state agency, earning credibility, learning from my constituents, helping to pass statewide legislation, driving consensus, planning for a stronger future, and building real projects. With my broad knowledge, vision, and skills, I believe that I will be the most effective legislator for us here in Lexington and Woburn, and I hope to earn your vote.
Thank you, Michelle. Matthew.
I was born in Lexington, and my wife and I are currently raising an 8-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son here. I love this district, and I want to give back for everything that it's given me. Serving as your state representative is the best way I can do so. If elected, I will focus on improving education across the Commonwealth, making sure the economy works for everyone, assuring access to quality health care, protecting the environment, and ensuring the government serves all its residents. My experience is particularly relevant to this job. I've spent my life studying and working in government, and recently earned a PhD in political science from Northeastern. I have worked at all levels of government, including over 7 years as a research and budget director at the Massachusetts State House. Whoever wins this race will not have the power that Representative Kaufman does. And it takes years to make connections and learn the procedures necessary to be truly effective at the State House. Thanks to my unique experience in this race, I have already gone through this learning process. I led a team that drafted and passed major legislation. I have formed coalitions with legislators, the Speaker's office, and the Governor's office under Democrats and Republicans. I worked around roadblocks to get new policies implemented outside of the traditional legislative processes. Learning these takes years, but I'll be ready from day one. I am the candidate with the proven track record of innovative thinking and consensus building at the State House. I have the courage to stand firm for what I believe in while effectively working with others. Thank you.
It takes me a second to say thank you for being here. So thank you for being here, everyone, and good evening. My name is Joe Lahiff. I'm running for state representative in the 15th Middlesex District. I grew up in town here. I spent my life in school here, going to school here, working as a police officer here. I have deep roots in Lexington. I'm a former police officer. I spent 22 years with the Lexington Police Department. As a part of my service with the police department, I was a field training officer, I was a detective, and I was a school resource officer. While I was assigned as a school resource officer, I worked with the administrators, the teachers, the guidance counselors, the parents to make sure that that school was safe, to make sure that every school in our community was safe. It was a day in and day out job. Working with parents, educators, and community members, I was appointed to the school council and wound up being chairman of the school council. It was a fantastic opportunity. It allowed me to see inside what happens in our schools and how to keep them safe. I'm currently the Director of Asset Management at a company called New Path, Inc. in Woburn. New Path is a human services company. We take care of people that have disabilities, brain injuries, are suffering from autism. We support them in their daily lives. Our mission at New Path, quite simply, is to make life's journey happier, healthier, and more fulfilling for people living with disabilities. I'm a former Lexington Town Meeting member. I'm a husband, and I'm a dad to 3 great kids. Some of them were outside holding signs, and I hope they were nice to you on your way in. If elected, my priorities will include addressing school violence, addressing our crippling opioid epidemic and giving a voice to people who literally cannot speak for themselves. It matters to me, and it's going to happen. I believe that our community is among the very best in the state.
You get to wrap up.
So long as we keep listening to each other, we'll continue to be the very best. And I want to listen to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary Ann Stewart.
Thanks. I am delighted to be here, and I am Mary Ann Stewart. So like many of you, my husband and I chose to live here. And when we moved into Lexington 24 years ago, it was through the affordable housing program, LexHab. When Duncan lost his job, that's my husband, in the early 2000s, it took him nearly 3 years to find another full-time job with benefits. I negotiated health care coverage for our family from my employer, even though I was not working full-time. I learned to navigate a complex system of special education services for our daughter. And I have experienced the heartbreaking loss of a loved one to opiate addiction. It's my family story that motivates me to do what I do in the community and run for public office. I understand how families struggle today, even though they work harder than ever, that seniors on a fixed income are limited as to what they can pay to continue to live in and support their communities, and the challenges young adults face as they struggle with student debt and search for work. I believe in representation that champions quality public services that people need to overcome the challenges they face every day. My call to service is a call to improve the lives of all residents in the 15th Middlesex and the Commonwealth. They deserve a living wage, affordable health care, housing as a human right, and educational equity for all children no matter where they live. Serving as our next state rep is an opportunity to extend my call to service and to extend my leadership on critical issues we face in the district and beyond. Thank you.
Next is William Sweeney.
Hi, folks. My name is Bill Sweeney, and I'm running for state representative because the time has come for debt-free public higher education. You know, I grew up in a family that instilled the belief in me that democracy is not a spectator sport. When I grew up, we realized that good government does not just happen. You have to get out there. You have to work hard. You have to make it happen. You have to fight for it every day. So here I am. 30 years ago, I went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. I was able to work weekends. I was able to work summers. I was able to work nights. And I was actually able to put myself through school. That's an opportunity that doesn't exist today, and we need to bring that type of opportunity back. From UMass, I did go to Washington. I worked on Capitol Hill. I came back. I worked on Beacon Hill, so I have good familiarity with the legislative process. And as I settled into my family life, I moved here to Lexington about 22-ish years ago. And so all that time, while I was trying to be a great dad, I was also trying to be a good citizen. And then we all had the experience a few years ago. Bernie ran for president. I enthusiastically supported him. Hillary ran for president. I enthusiastically supported her. I do believe that Bernie brought the conversation back around to very real and very fundamental progressive ideas and ideals. And the other reason I'm standing before you today is that we need to keep that conversation going. We need to bring that conversation to Beacon Hill. And in that regard, I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So, Matthew, the first question goes to you first. So you had a minute and a half, and everybody else gets a minute thereafter. What specific environmental protection measures do you support?
It's an important question, and environmental protection is one of the cores of my platform. And I think it's critical that we take a number of steps in this regard. One thing I think we need to do is to really expand the availability of alternative sources of energy and sort of alternative power for homes. I do know that there is, at the same time, some people who will push back and say, well, only homeowners will benefit from that. I think that's an important point as well. But what we really need to do in this regard is create sort of community solar. We need to make it easier for towns and cities and really all of the Commonwealth to be able to access this sort of alternative energy. I do not support the efforts to sort of create new pipelines bringing energy into Massachusetts. I think more important is to invest within that alternative energy. I think that's really going to be a critical step here, because that's going to be what's going to help move us away from this. But with that, we need to look at public transportation and things like bike lanes. Because as we extend into public transportation, if we're able to give people another option, one that's reliable. If you ever want to look at the Boston Globe for record of why it is public transportation is not always reliable, you can find a picture of my back walking out of one of the tunnels after being stuck on there for 3 hours. So we got to make it sure that that doesn't happen so that people can really use it. This will be a win for commuters. It'll be a win for the environment. So, bike lanes, a win for public health. So thank you.
Joe? Let's hold the applause for the end, okay?
Matthew Cohen, ladies and gentlemen. I've been a very big fan of solar for years and years. Our first house that we ever bought together had solar panels on it. The company that I work for right now, Newpath, if you look at our roof at our headquarters on 147 New Boston Street, is wall-to-wall solar panels. It's completely covered. It was one of the first buildings in Woburn to do that. I'm also a fan of trying to change the transportation system that we have now, not just statewide, but on a smaller level. Part of the department that I oversee is the transportation department. Most of you are familiar with the special needs vans. They're big, they're 15 passengers, they're gas guzzlers, and they emit a ton of exhaust. We're working with DDS right now to get energy efficient cars smaller so that they're not quite as obvious as an institutional vehicle, and at the same time lower the impact that we have on our environment. It's important, and it's something we're going to continue to do.
Thanks, Joe. Mary Ann?
Protecting the environment is one of my core values, and I want to say that we need to move as quickly as we can to renewable energy, keep fossil fuels in the ground, be at 100% renewable. And climate change is one of the most pressing issues that we face. It affects our public health, it affects public safety, as well as our environment. I think the Senate bill that was just passed the other day takes bold steps to commit reduction of greenhouse gases and brings renewable energy to Massachusetts. It was an incredible bill because it passed unanimously. And I think if I were in the House, I'd like to build coalitions to see where we are with agreement on this bill. And it's clear that progressive voices are unheard on Beacon Hill. So building those relationships with colleagues within the Progressive Caucus and strategically figuring out a plan, making a plan to move this bill so that it passes in the House as well.
Thank you. Bill?
Specifically, Massachusetts needs to become known as the home of renewable energy. That means solar and wind. Most importantly, it also means we have to find the right way to partner with industry on this. There's some shenanigans going on now over at the Department of Public Utilities. For example, if you're trying to use power off peak and you think you're doing a good thing, so you're running your appliances at night, now that can be considered peak usage, and they're going to start applying concepts that were usually reserved for commercial use of power, and they're going to bring it to the home, which we just can't have. So we need to get industry in line. That's going to take some good legislation. So driving forward on solar and wind, partnering with industry, but making sure these kind of shenanigans aren't allowed to happen with good legislation, that's what we're going to do. Thanks.
Michelle?
Well, we were asked what specific things that we support. I support the carbon tax or cap and trade system to be applied to the building sector as well as the vehicle sector. I support the Global Warming Solutions Act and the full implementation of that, which is currently the law in Massachusetts, lifting the cap on net metering and increasing the renewable portfolio standard in Massachusetts at an aggressive rate. I'm very proud of my record here in Lexington and the Board of Selectmen's record on the environment. We've advanced a Getting to Net Zero task force that will be looking at actually removing carbon from all of our buildings within 20 years, and it's a very exciting opportunity that we have here in Lexington. I've also worked very hard on a number of solar projects myself personally, and here in Lexington, of course, we've put solar on all of our buildings. We're looking to make our new schools all electric schools wherever we can so that those schools can be completely net zero buildings. I have a proud track record on the environment.
Thank you. Next question, Joe, you get to kick us off here. What is your position on the Safe Communities Act?
Thank you. So what's happening at the border is disgusting. It's absolutely atrocious. It should not be happening. I have absolutely no idea how it got so bad. I know it's taken years to get there. It's not something that I can watch and actually tolerate. Getting something to change needs to happen right away. The Safe Communities Act that I've read here in Massachusetts has very little to do with that particular issue. The Safe Communities Act that I've read limits communication between local, state, and federal agencies. As a police officer, when I was working on the street, when I would pull someone over that didn't have a Massachusetts license, that didn't have a passport, that had no ID other than a piece of paper with a stamp on it, not being able to call another agency to find out if this person was actually who they were was incredibly frustrating and, to me, incredibly dangerous for the entire community. Time after time after time, I would pull someone over for running a red light, for speeding, for getting into an accident, and not be able to tell who that person was. The Safe Communities Act, as it's written, and which has been put into study, I believe, until December, is something that limits communication. It needs to be improved upon. Once it is improved upon, I believe it's something I can get behind. But for right now, I'm not in favor of the way it's written.
Marianne?
I fully support the Safe Communities Act as it's coming through as a budget amendment. As it passed in the Senate, it's a very strong bill, and it's much stronger and clearer than what our Board of Selectmen allowed to pass. I think that as we go forward, we'll see what happens. Governor Baker may not approve this particular bill. He's not a big fan, but I do think whatever happens, I will support the strongest bill possible.
Bill?
You know, when I read the Safe Communities Act, I went looking for two things. Does it treat people who are acting like citizens, and they are basically citizens except for in name, while Washington sorts itself out? Does it give them the protection that they need? And at the same time, if they aren't acting like citizens, if they are running afoul of the law and like a felony, does it retain the tools for law enforcement to have that enter their calculations when they need to do the right thing, which may be, in fact, working with the federal government? My read of the bill is that it does both. It seems to strike a very difficult balance, and this was the Senate version, that we need to strike. And it does treat people who are acting like citizens with the respect they deserve. And it also allows law enforcement to take action for those who are running afoul of the law with a felony. So I support it.
Michelle?
I support the Safe Communities Act and will work to get the strongest legislation passed that we can pass. Here in Lexington, as a member of the Board of Selectmen, we worked with the police department and the proponents of the Safe Communities warrant article to pass a provision in our town meeting warrant that made sense that we could work with. It may not have been perfect, but we think it was vitally important to send a strong signal to our community that no one should be afraid to live here and no one should be afraid to report a crime for fear that they or their neighbors will be deported. We need to have strong messages that we send to our community, and we need to be clear on that. So while it is difficult to devise perfect resolution, the enemy of the good, the perfect should not be the enemy of the good, and I do believe that we need to work together to make language that is acceptable.
And Matthew?
No, I too have been sickened watching what's been taking place down on the border. I know the Safe Communities Act does not directly relate to that, but it is a relevant sort of component of that, of how we treat our fellow human beings. I am a strong supporter of the Safe Communities Act. It will make our communities, as it suggests, safer. You know, many people in immigrant communities fear going to the police to report crimes because they fear they're going to be deported. This legislation, this bill, this budget amendment, however it ends up passing, will make that so it does not have to be the case, so that people can make their own communities safer, report problems within their midst, and make all of our communities safer. And really, in the end, we have to recognize this bill simply recognizes reality. These people are already here. That is what it is. We have to integrate them into our communities. They're a critical part of our immigrants, of our economy, history, culture. I'm guessing pretty much everyone here is descended at some point from an immigrant. My grandmother fled the Nazis to come here. We need more immigration. I'm a strong supporter of the act.
Thank you. Marianne, you get to be the first on this next question, and we're going to go around twice. The first part of the question requires a simple yes, no, and then we'll go back and give you a chance to build on that. So here's the question. This is the yes, no part. This week's SJC decision to knock the proposed fair share amendment off the ballot leaves the issue of tax fairness and inadequate revenue for another day. In one word, yes or no, will you work and vote for fair share when it comes back before the legislature next year as a properly framed legislative initiative rather than a citizen petition?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
No.
Next question, follow-up question. Given that proposal will not be on the ballot, what do we do for revenue, new revenue, over the next 4 years before the voters will have a chance to vote on a constitutional amendment?
This is a really good question. So I think I heard that Senator Jason Lewis is already making a plan to submit language that's identical to what was on the Fair Share Amendment. I was very deeply disappointed that the SJC ruled the way that they did, because we very desperately need better funding for public education and public transportation. But that said, we need to look very critically at some of the recommendations that were already made years ago by the Tax Fairness Commission to do a full audit of our tax expenditures, to look at closing loopholes, to really look at the payments in lieu of taxes so that they are not voluntary for the largest nonprofits, but that they are mandatory. And then just begin to work with the Progressive Caucus. I will strengthen the Progressive Caucus if I'm elected, to work with them to strategically plan our next steps and how we can pass this very important piece of legislation. It will be important for the next 2 legislative sessions at least. It will take 4 years to get it to the ballot, 2022. We can't wait 4 years, so we actively need to be pursuing maybe temporary revenues or some solution that is going to get us the revenues that we need to move forward for our people. Thank you.
Thanks. So let me be very clear. I said yes because we absolutely need tax fairness. And it's very clear to me that the tax structure that we have today needs to be modified. But I didn't like the millionaires, the amendment as it was proposed. And I probably wouldn't have voted for it had it been on the ballot for a lot of the same reasons that it was struck down. Now, that said, you're not going to find somebody who doesn't understand that we need to have a taxation system that does its part in reducing wealth and income inequality. So let's talk about wealth and income. All income is not created equal. I could do a dissertation on this. You should go to my website. We could talk about this for hours, so I'll make it as clear as I can. Capital gains are when your money is working for you, and W-2 income is when you are working for your money. I believe we could tax capital gains differently, very differently, than we tax W-2 income, and that's how we're going to take this next. So when I say yes, it's because we're going to be fair. We're going to have the fair share, but we're going to attack the class of income that needs to be approached. Thank you.
Michelle.
I absolutely believe we need to work to make our tax system more progressive and more fair. Income inequality is a serious problem for all of our residents here in Massachusetts. So not only did I support the Fair Share Amendment, but we will need to look for new revenues to plug the holes in our budget for transportation and education in particular. There's a significant deficit in what we're spending. So one of the opportunities that we have is to stop the rollback of the income tax, which is actually slated to be reduced come January 1st, 2019. And I actually think that could produce around $800 million of revenue that would be lost to the Commonwealth if we actually go forward and implement that. There are a number of other opportunities. The regional ballot initiatives is something I've been supporting for a long time as part of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and my work with them. That will give opportunities for regions to work together to come up with transportation solutions. We should increase the CPA deeds fee so that communities that have the Community Preservation Act can continue to invest in affordable housing, the environment, and historic preservation. I'm just about out of time, but I have a very long list of other suggestions which I'm happy to share with anyone afterwards.
Matthew?
I too was disappointed by this decision, and I would spend my time working to address these problems and address these issues so we can get it back on the ballot. What I would not want to see are efforts that would raise taxes on lower and middle income people. I don't think that's the correct solution to this. But I think one thing we can do, for example, taking just transportation, I too would be happy to talk a lot more about this afterwards if anyone interested, but on the transportation issue, we can pass legislation that allows sort of communities that are neighboring communities to establish joint local levies focused on transportation and infrastructure projects, and then have those be subject to those local communities. This can be a great way for sort of local communities and regions to work together in order to solve some of these problems. I think part of the answer, I will agree that the pilot program, the pilot fees are critical to this. We should work on those. And I think we have to encourage economic development. If we do things even just like raising the minimum wage, it will lead to more spending. And it looks like we might be raising the minimum wage, which would be great. But if we do that, that can help. So,
Thank you. Joe?
So I was not disappointed by the failure of the Fair Share Amendment. I have been disappointed by a number of things. This is a fairly new process to me. I spent a lot of years reading general laws, mostly in law enforcement. What I never saw ever once in the general laws was a commission added to study the general laws. What I've seen in every single bill that I've read so far is a commission with 11, 12, 15, 18 people assigned to it and a budget number attached to it to study some of the most simplistic things you could ever possibly imagine. I don't think raising the taxes on people until we've actually taken a look at how we're spending our money right now, the money that's brought in every single day from tax-paying people, is looked at and is understood completely. It's baffling to me how much money we spend on studies and commissions. I'd want to do that before I would agree to raise taxes on people.
Okay, Bill, you get the first shot at this. Fundamental to a democracy is people's right to vote. What is your position on AVR, or automatic voter registration, and same-day registration, or any of the other ideas that have been brought forward, or any other ideas that you have?
Sure. Right, so the question is, do you think people should have the right to vote, same-day registration? You know, there's no sort of more important duty when you're sitting out there in that audience, and so thank you for giving your time tonight. You have to get out there and vote, and folks just aren't doing it, right? People need to be more, I'll use the word educated, right? But sometimes you have to bring some of the ideas to them, which is part of the reason that I'm running. And hopefully part of what we're going to be able to do is extend all of the different ways. We have motor voter, we're going to get same-day voting. I'm really fond of my oldest daughter, who's going to college next year, actually signed up as a pre-voter. I forget what the actual technical term is, but she was able to pre-register because she'll be of age at the right time. And she was incredibly happy to do it, and she was the first person, I think, that signed my papers when I pulled them. So, but you know what the moment that was for her, right? And so she's excited to vote. And we need to create. Not only do we need to make sure that there's easy access to the voting booth. So to the heart of the question, we are going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that our people, that our citizens, that folks have easy access to the voting booth. That said, we do need to do some things to get it a little bit more exciting. If that means if it's an opt-out, maybe we go with an opt-out program. But those are the kinds of things that we're going to do, and I'll fight very hard for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
I'll be quick. Anything we can do to make it easier to vote is important. I think we need to offer all these opportunities that are suggested with automatic voter registration. But I also think we need to support the town clerks and our registrars to make it easier for them, because their work is important in administering our elections. I think we ought to consider making our elections on Saturdays so people don't have to compete with work and busy life schedule to get to the ballot. So anything we can do to make it easier to vote, absolutely.
Thanks. Matthew?
You know, I believe that democracy can only thrive when citizens are engaged, active, and knowledgeable. So I'm a strong proponent of expanding the ease with which people can vote. I want to make it easier to register to vote, enact automatic voter registration, expand early voting, and the use of absentee ballots. You know, I also think we might want to look at expanding the voting age to 16. It's controversial to some, but I think it's a good idea. You know, and as a political scientist by training, I've seen studies and evidence that show that these things work to bring out greater turnout within the process. And it's critical in all of this that we make sure that no group of people feels that they're being discouraged from voting or blocked from voting, as we've seen far too often in too many places around the country. You know, thankfully, not as much here, but we always have to be on our guard for that. And one last point, there might be a representative here who likes some of this stuff, but civics education, I think, is an important component of this. You know, defining exactly what it is, we can go from there, but making sure people have a basic understanding of the American system, it's not a horrible idea in this process.
Joe?
I love the idea of automatic voter registration. I'm a big fan of early voting. I think if we can get more people to the polls, it's fantastic. Something I have children of this age, so it might be a little bit of an unfair advantage. When my kids were going through high school, there were military recruiters in every single cafeteria for every branch of the service. I don't see why we don't send recruiters to the high schools when kids are seniors and get them enrolled right then. It's a recruiting tactic that the Secretary of State could use, that our volunteers on a local level could use. Get into the cafeterias, you're turning 18, have you registered to vote? Here's how. Do you need any help with it? Is there anybody at home that might want to register? I think it's something we need to expand on and make much easier for people.
Thanks. Mary Ann?
Same-day voter registration, yes. Automatic voter registration, yes. Voting is a right, and voter registration should be made as easy as possible. I also support mail-in voting to eliminate the problem of marginalized communities not being able to access the polls because of the kinds of work hours that they have to work. A government of, by, and for the people is among the highest ideals of our country. Increased government transparency, support for implementation of a robust public financing plan for politics at every level, clean elections. Polls should be safe and accessible when they're used. And with regard to civics education, I've been working with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education as a Board of Education member for the past 4 years, pushing for civics education, and we will be taking a vote on Tuesday, next Tuesday, to bring civics education to all public schools.
So the last question in this first round starts with you, Michelle. The legislature endorsed major criminal justice reform this year. Which elements of that reform do you applaud, and what, in your opinion, is left to be done?
Great question. I was really pleased to see a lot of the mandatory minimum sentences removed. I think that's vitally important. We have communities of color that are particularly hard hit by our current criminal justice system, and I want to see vast improvements in the incarceration rates to reduce recidivism and reduce incarceration rates, and I think the criminal justice bill will go a long way toward helping that. What I think still needs to be done is that we need to monitor and review the data and see what the sentencing is actually looking like in the real world as it impacts people who are caught up in the system. And so I think it's important for us to examine how the bill is unfolding and monitor it regularly.
Thank you. Matthew?
Yes, I think too this was a great step in the right direction in this type of legislation. I'm very happy to see mandatory minimums go away. I actually think we need a broader approach that I think we're throwing the wrong people in jail oftentimes. I don't know why we're throwing nonviolent offenders in jail really at all. It's mainly been used, honestly, historically as a way to suppress minority communities and keep minority communities down in the United States. And, you know, expanding further on this, we need to look broader because this is happening in our schools as well. You know, this process does not begin when kids suddenly turn 18 and all of a sudden there's racism. No, this exists all along this whole path. And so we need to do a much better job, even here in Lexington. And I've been working on this issue with a number of excellent activists. And, you know, we've been pushing at the school committee to try to really start enacting some policies. I'm hoping the new school superintendent seems to be interested in this. And I'm hoping to be able to work with her on this. But we need to look much broader than just criminal justice reform to get this done.
Thanks. Joe?
There have been some fantastic improvements in criminal justice reform in the state. I love what Sean Garberly did with restorative justice and dealing with the youth in our schools. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's furthering an initiative that Martha Coakley had started many years ago in the Middlesex District Attorney's Office. The criminal justice reforms are fantastic. They're needed and they need to continue. I think what the state needs to really do and what we need to do on a local level is look at how much our law enforcement is able to use the new tools. We're suffering right now in a town that is way down in its police complement. Having all the laws on the planet would be fantastic, but if you have no police officers out there to do it, it's something that we need to really look at and fix. State funding needs to improve to allow us to be able to hire more people, to hire more police officers, and we need to look closely at our hiring procedures to make sure that they're not so restrictive that good people who might not necessarily be looked at as police officers are actually considered. It's something that needs instant review.
Thank you. Mary Ann?
The criminal justice reform package was a good big step, and there is definitely more work to do. We need to continue to repeal mandatory minimums and reduce spending on prisons by reducing sentences and shifting resources to prevention, education, vocational education, and reentry programs. I applaud the pilot program that Sheriff Katusian is taking on to reduce incarceration due to mental health problems and incarceration, and also to continue to tear apart the school-to-prison pipeline, and that is another whole big work that has to be done in concert with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and Early Education.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, I agree. I fundamentally disagree with the notion of mandatory minimums. So that's what they got right in terms of what's the number one thing. That, in my opinion, 100%. That's the number one thing. And we need to do more work when it comes to the school-to-prison pipeline. I don't necessarily see it as a crime issue. I see it as an economic issue, and I'll gladly talk your ear off about all the things that we need to do around small business, around jobs, good paying jobs. And not reserving them, but actually, and when I say not reserving them, I mean by giving people access to capital so they can start their own businesses and have their own self-determination. I think that's the big part of it. But when it comes back to that prison issue, I'll tell you, I hear it over and over again, and it's true, right? What does somebody need when they come out? A ride, a job, a place to sleep for a couple days, a new suit of clothes. Those are the kinds of things that we need to start thinking about specific to the prison issue and give folks a helping hand, give them a hand up. They've done their time, right? So now it's time to give them a help and get them launched and reduce the recidivism. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next, we start the round where you get to ask each other questions. And next, the first to do this is Matthew. So again, the rules of engagement are 30 seconds or so to ask a question, a minute to answer them. So Matthew, what's your question for your colleagues here?
See, so in this age of Trump, we've seen the damage that financial conflicts of interest can cause. Do you have any investments or work with any companies involved in oil and energy, tobacco, private prisons? Will you post or provide a link to your statement of financial interest form, which includes this information on your website so that people can easily see it and they can judge sort of the conflicts themselves?
Okay, Joe?
Me first? Okay. No, to my knowledge, I do not have any. I don't have any personal investments in oil or energy. I'm a retiree from the Lexington Police Department. I'm not entirely positive if the retirement system has cleaned itself yet of the fossil fuel industry. I think it's an initiative that was being tried, but personally, no, I do not have any investments in any of those things.
Marianne?
I have no connections to the fossil fuel industry or the NRA or any other kinds of interests that would impede my work. I have no conflicts of interest. In terms of the statement of financial interest, that's already public information. Anybody can get it at any time.
Bill?
So this is all a little bit new to me. So when I went to go file my papers, right, so that I could be qualified to get on the ballot, I needed to go through this process of filing this State Ethics Commission disclosure, which forced me to go and take a look at what money I do have, where is it. And so if you go to look it up, and I will post it on the website, there's a position on there in ExxonMobil. And so I sort of sat back and realized that I didn't even sort of know, right? I put it into someone else's hands and said, hey, well, I need to retire someday, so how do we do this? So upon learning that I had that position, it is now spread across a couple of different clean energy funds. I'll tell you, it was sort of eye-opening to me. I didn't really consider that way to have an impact. So yes, I'm happy to file my current the positions when I needed to fill out the paperwork. I was true to what I had, and will happily put that on my website as well as the kind of the change that I made. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
I don't have any conflicts of interest that would impede my ability to do my job effectively. I do have oil and gas and tobacco stocks, and I'll tell you why. My husband's sister, when she passed away at the age of 51 from breast cancer, left us a portfolio of stocks, and the issue is too raw and emotional for us, and we have yet to divest of those stocks. So yes, we own them, but within the coming years, when we can revisit those accounts, we will get rid of those stocks. Does that impede my ability to do my job? I think not. I know that Mr. Cohen and his team has downloaded my financial statement of financial interest. I'm happy to share it with anybody else who wants to see it. I can put a link on my website and share it with anybody.
Thank you. Joe, you get to ask the next question.
Last week I had a privilege of being invited to a neighborhood meeting, neighbors of Belmont Country Club. They've organized themselves into a group
Let's
called
get right to the
Preserve Our
question, though.
Neighborhoods. They're opposed to expansion at Belmont Country Club, and I'd like to know how the candidates up here will respond if they're approached by this group or a similar group to stop expansion like what's going to happen at Belmont Country Club.
Thank you. Mary Ann.
I was just reading about this. I'm not up to speed on this issue. It came up to town meeting. It came up a couple years ago as a potential issue for town meeting, but it has changed substantially since then. I met with local abutters to the property over off Golden Avenue in Lexington at the Belmont-Arlington line. So I really don't know. I'm not as familiar with this issue as Joe is.
Bill?
Yeah, I won't pretend. I don't know what the issue is, so I really can't render an informed opinion on it, which would be my preference. So I guess the only thing I could say at this point is I've been in a butter when there have been projects that I sort of liked or had some concerns with. I found that there were ways to work with the person that wanted to do their expansion. That case was a little easier than this, probably because they were neighbors and whatnot. And I have also needed to go to my neighbors and let them know that I'm doing things, and we found a way to work it out. So I guess we would let the process unfold and take it from there.
Michelle?
The Belmont Country Club land and some of the developments going on in town, they have recently filed for a rezoning, and that will be coming before town meeting. We are just receiving the documents to consider whether or not that project is something we want to support. As with any project, one of the biggest concerns abutters often have is traffic and the impacts of noise and tree clearing and things to immediate abutters. It's too premature to render an opinion on that project because it hasn't been fully vetted. So that is something that we will see in the weeks and months ahead.
Matthew?
I've been beginning to learn about this particular issue. I will admit that it is not something that I know in great detail as well. I would tend to side really with the local community that will be most impacted by this, but I do think it's important that we listen to all the parties that are involved in this particular setup, so we can try to find either some compromise that will work, or we can, if not, have to determine what comes next. So something I'm definitely looking into, and I've begun to speak with some of the groups involved in this.
Mary Ann, you get to ask the next question.
I'd like to know what supports you have received from the business community.
None. My support is knocking door to door, family, friends, phone calls, basically calling everybody I knew, everybody that I coached with when I coached Lexington Youth Lacrosse. I'm now working my way down the list. That was the Lexington Youth Summer Theater. So if you're a part of that, you're in my sights.
Michelle?
I work very closely with the business community here in Lexington, and in my job when I was the assistant town administrator in Hudson, I actually helped to start a business organization to support the local economy. I have over 300 individual endorsers. Many of them are business owners here in Lexington. Many of them are residents and prominent local leaders, school committee members, zoning board members, et cetera. So I have extensive support from lots of people in the community.
Matthew?
I have no explicit ties to the business community. I imagine some of my supporters as well are business people as well. But beyond that, no, I've worked with businesses before while at the State House, working on legislation, finding compromises that would create effective legislation that would both protect business interests and the interests of others. So, but no, I don't have any particular ties to the business world.
Joe?
I don't believe I have any significant ties to the business community as far as investments or people supporting me. I went to school with a young man named Pat Hunt, who owns a hardwood floor company, and put a sign up for me. Other than that, I don't think I have any significant supports from them or opposition from them either. I'm reluctant to actually ask a business owner to put a sign up in front of their house or their business. I think it would probably negatively impact them in one way or another. Lots of people like me, lots of people like Michelle, Matthew, Bill, and Mary Ann, so I don't want to affect anybody's business by asking them to actually put a sign up and negatively impact it, though I would welcome their support if they want to give it.
Great. Bill, you get to ask the next question.
Great. So, I think the debt markets and the debt profiteers have now asked our people to mortgage their future, and they're doing it in the form of having to take exorbitant loans for their education. So the time for debt-free public higher education has come. So my question to the candidates here with us tonight is, how would you pay for it?
Michelle.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have the fair share amendment to call on, but debt-free college is extremely important for us to move in that direction. And one of the things that I think we could look at is assessing a fee on the university endowments over $500 million. Just like we have to pay capital gains tax if we own anything that appreciates in value and generates income, so could the universities that are extremely wealthy, and that money could be used to subsidize university students at our public colleges. That's one option that we could explore.
Matthew?
No, I think the ideal behind this is great. I, too, am concerned about how you pay for it. We have a constitutional requirement for a balanced budget. I've seen the painful trade-offs you've got to make when you're faced with that. I'm not sure. I don't know what one proposes to cut in order to pay for this. And, I look at it a little differently. And part of what's made state schools unaffordable is that the legislature has repeatedly cut funding to higher education, which then passes those expenses on to the students. I would obviously not support those cuts. And cost increases have also come from massive increases in unnecessary administrative expenses, which leads to costs into the system and thus to students. And I think we need to think a little bit more broadly about this too, in that not every student wants to go to college. Not every job requires a college degree. And we need to look at properly funding vocational schools, community colleges, job training programs. We need to provide a range of opportunities for people so that everyone can sort of get what they need in the system.
Joe?
Debt-free college, that was the question. How would I pay for it? There were 3 kids, one of them just graduated, so that's a fascinating question. On a depressing note, many, many years ago, some of you will remember it, we had an override here in town that failed. I think it was 2003 or 2004. A lot of police officers got laid off, a lot of firefighters got laid off. They closed East Lexington Fire Station. At the time, the school department took an equally large hit. They eliminated virtual positions. I still don't know what a virtual position is. I would imagine if our colleges have virtual positions, we might want to start with looking at how can we trim their budget before we actually hit the taxpayers for free education. Someone explaining it to me as far as why you might have a virtual position, then I might agree to it. Until then, let's look at how they're spending money and maybe start there to cut.
And Mary Ann?
This is such a complicated question because so much of why we're in the situation that we're in with regard to how we have no funding for these critical structures like debt-free college, like public education, like public transportation, is because policy decisions were made about 20 years ago that reduced our revenues by $3 to $4 billion, and we've never recovered from that. So these decisions keep on having an impact year to year. We start from a negative balance in our budget, $3 to $4 billion short. I would propose that we give students the same low interest rates as big banks. I think we work our way toward debt-free college. I don't think cutting administrative salaries is going to raise the millions of dollars that we need. And so I guess, it's definitely a sense of, it's a matter of will. It takes guts. It takes real leadership and judgment on this stuff. So that's what I'll be pushing for.
Michelle, you get to ask the next question.
Please describe a local community project that you successfully led and tell us about the project's outcomes and your involvement and role in the initiative.
You know, I've lived here my whole life. I've been heavily involved in Lexington and, taken on many initiatives. I worked on Representative Kaufman's first campaign. By the way, I think that worked out pretty well. So I'm happy with that one. But, in the end, the things I worked on at the State House have an impact at the local level. That's one of the things that I learned when I was there, was just how much of an impact we can have on people while we're down there. And, honestly, the skills that I picked up at the State House, I've worked at the local level. I was in the Lexington Town Manager's office. I've worked at the federal level. I was an intern for Senator Kennedy. I know all the differences between these, and the skills you pick up in one of these don't necessarily translate into another one of these levels. The personalities, procedures, rules, and behaviors are all very different at these different levels. So, I've tried very hard to always think, especially from my time in the Lexington Town Manager's office, how will this legislation impact that local community?
Joe?
Thank you. I'm going to jump in the Wayback Machine to when I was a school resource officer. At the time, juvenile diversion did not exist. I worked as a school resource officer with the principal, with the school committee, with Martha Coakley's office to create Lexington's first juvenile diversion program. It stopped kids from being fed automatically into the court system and allowed the schools, allowed the parents, allowed law enforcement to meet without necessarily generating a record for a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid. It's been endorsed since, it's been expanded on. Like I mentioned, Sean Garbely's legislation earlier tonight grows off of what we created, but it goes into the Wayback Machine, way back in the early 2000s when I was a school resource officer, and Middlesex District Attorney's Office led that charge. It was fantastic to work on, and I'm still proud of it today.
Thanks. Mary Ann?
On some local issues, when I was on the school committee, I worked to improve in-house special education programs for children and also to support resources for students coming in from Boston to support their transition from elementary school to middle school, from middle school to high school. On the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, where I am now and have been for 4 years after Governor Deval Patrick appointed me, I've pushed for progressive change and navigated the process for improving social-emotional learning, for LGBTQ equality, and for, as I mentioned earlier, civics and media literacy.
Thanks.
And Bill?
So I have been working in the private sector for the last 20 plus years. So all of my civic expression has really been through my children, mostly, and somewhat through my job a little bit. So for 7 years, I coached in the Lexington Youth Lacrosse League. I can't tell you the joy it brings me to go catch one of the JV or varsity games at the high school and see a number of my former players out there. It does the heart good, let me tell you. As I had mentioned earlier, my daughter is very focused on drama and music, and so I built sets through List. Most recently, through my company, we sort of adopted a group where it was developmentally disabled adults, and we were able to kind of help them build their sets and have their show at the end of the day. So really, my civic expression has been through my kids and the community that way. Thank you.
Thank you. So I realize I changed the order on you guys without intending to. I was going to give you a minute each as an opportunity for a second bite at some of the things that have already come up. I didn't do that when I said I would do it, but I can do it now. So, Matthew, any second thoughts or things that you wish you had said or that come to mind now to finish up some of what we've already done?
Sure. So, just sort of starting off, so obviously I'm very sorry for your loss. But I was not a personal attack on any candidate. I've downloaded everyone's, including my own. Personal transparency. This is a commitment to me of good government, a commitment to me of transparency. I care very deeply that we make sure that we have a government that functions for the people. And that's what I would do if I were elected. I encourage you to download my form. I encourage you to look at where I'm invested. Please do. That's why I've put it out there. This was not targeting anyone in any specific way. So that was not intended that way.
Joe?
I'm going to save you a minute.
Thank you. I accept.
Just a couple of points. I wanted to just clarify that the Senate bill, the Energy and Environment bill that passed, will achieve all of our goals that we aspire to for a carbon tax, to lift the caps on net metering, and it supplants the Global Warming Solutions Act with improved energy and initiatives that we have all been pushing for. As regards the sales tax loss, Mass Budget has been saying that it will reduce our revenues by about $1.2 million. And the point is, I think, that progressive voices are underheard on Beacon Hill, and I'm going to work to build power, progressive power, because part of my job is to build a progressive movement and not run departments.
Bill?
Thank you. I'm going to take my minute, and I'm going to try to hit on two topics. First, I'm going to try to answer a bit of my own question, right? How are we going to pay for debt-free public college for our kids, for our people, really? And interestingly enough, it disproportionately affects women. If you look at the statistics, they're the ones taking the majority of the debt. So this is an important issue, right? And the bottom line there is, it comes back to, we're going to fight like hell so that the spirit of the Fair Share Amendment, the millionaire's tax, is revisited in the very near future. I said I didn't agree with sort of the implementation of it. There are many, many ways. Income is treated differently by source already, and we're going to go and we're going to make sure, again, if you work for your money, you need to be treated differently than if your money is working for you, and that's a bottom line thing for me. We're going to do that. The second thing is just a little bit about business. I'm not endorsed by business, but I will tell you I have been in the private sector for 20 years. I think it's an important point to make that we need to, especially when it comes to the environment, you have to get business at the table. I think I bring a unique perspective that way, and that's the way we're going to move forward on that. Thank you.
And Michelle?
I guess I'll also take a minute to answer my own question. I've had a 25-year career in government, but I'm also particularly proud of the things I've been able to do here in Lexington. I chaired the Community Center Advisory Commission, which helped bring that facility on board, and chaired the Estabrook School Ad Hoc Task Force. I helped Lex Farm get started. I worked on quite a few projects here locally, but then also in my career for the town of Hudson, doing extensive downtown revitalization, and from there was elected to be president of the Regional Planning Council, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. My work there led me to be able to help pass the statewide Complete Streets Law. It was my idea. I brought it to the agency, got it delivered, passed, approved, and then worked with MassDOT to implement that program. We haven't yet gotten a chance to talk about transportation, but I have extensive experience in that realm and extensive experience in my career working to make real change on the ground. So I won't go on because I'm running out of time, but we'll move to the next point.
Thank you. We're now into the fourth segment of this evening, where we'll again ask some of your questions of the candidates, and it'll be 1 minute each as we go through these candidates. And Joe, you get the first question. Do you support extreme risk protection orders, ERPO, also known as the red flag law?
Thank you. Yeah, we took away firearms from people that needed it due to mental health reasons pretty much on a regular basis when we were police officers. The idea, the concept of somebody not being mentally fit or mentally sound to possess a firearm is an easy one. It's a no-brainer. I don't have a reason not to support that.
Great. Thank you. Marianne?
I believe the red flag law is such an important gun safety measure. It allows family members and law enforcement officers to request a court order to temporarily restrict a person's access to guns if they pose a significant risk to themselves or others. This life-saving bill would help prevent acts of gun violence like mass shootings and gun suicides. Reducing and preventing gun violence is a public safety issue, not a political one. And while Massachusetts has some of the strongest gun laws, respecting rights and protecting people go hand in hand. I've been recognized by Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America as a candidate who will stand up for gun violence prevention and gun safety. I will support legislation that does more to keep guns out of the hands of felons, domestic abusers, and people with dangerous histories, knowing that respecting rights and protecting people go hand in hand. Common sense public safety measures like our communities make our communities safer and protect lives.
So my answer is wholeheartedly. I think the appropriate use of the phrase extreme vetting should be applied to the consideration of people having firearms in the home, whether for sport or recreation or whatever it is. I believe that people have that right, undeniably, but again, this is one of those cases where you really need to make sure that they're in the hands of folks who are able to handle them, so I would say wholeheartedly. Interestingly enough, there is also a process underway right now, as I understand it, where some licenses are being rechecked, and we found 300 or 400, I think the number is, of licenses that were issued that should not have been issued, and there's a process underway now to pull back those licenses and hopefully find a way to dispense with and deal with any weapons that were sold under that. I agree with that wholeheartedly and would encourage we would extend and expand on those types of initiatives when it comes to gun control.
Michelle.
I wholeheartedly support the extreme risk protection orders, and I'm pleased that the law has passed the House and is expected to make it to the governor's desk, and he's expected to sign it. I think we need to do more, though, in Massachusetts. We have excellent gun laws, as Mary Ann pointed out here in Massachusetts, but we can do more. One of my constituents, Jonathan Suber, made an excellent suggestion. He's a town meeting member here, and he suggested that we ought to hold people civilly liable and require insurance for gun owners as a means of making sure that guns are properly stored, locked up, and kept safe. And I thought that was a brilliant suggestion. It's something that I would love to introduce as legislation. We can and must do more to protect people and to keep guns from getting into violent people's hands.
Matthew.
I absolutely support this as well. It's a common sense step to be able to take here. I too, by the way, have been recognized by Moms Demand Action. I was recognized as a gun sense candidate with the gun sense candidate distinction. There we go. It's a tricky thing to say, but because we need good common sense gun control and reform. Look, this is well in keeping with the Second Amendment, and that's something important to remember. We have to make laws in keeping with that Second Amendment, and this is well in keeping with that. This is not a permanent seizure of anyone's guns. This is not the abrogation of anyone's rights. This is a common sense measure to make sure that people who pose an immediate danger to the community no longer will pose that danger.
I was getting some advice here because we have time for 4 more questions, and I have 5 great questions. So. Mary Ann, you get to answer the one that wound up on the top of the pile. A recent poll showed that only 52% of mass voters support a yes vote to keep the state's existing transgender non-discrimination law in place. What actions will you take over the next 20 weeks to generate awareness about the ballot question and support for a yes vote to keep the current non-discrimination law in place?
I'm going to continue to build on actions I've been doing for the past couple of months. I have been wearing my trans ribbon when I go knocking door to door so that folks know that I'm supporting the transgender rights. Trans rights are human rights, and so I will vote yes on the bill when it comes up this fall. And I've gotten a lot of questions about the ribbon, and so I'm happy to explain that to people. I wrote a letter in the Minuteman. It was published online about this exact ballot initiative, and it's actually quite appalling that we're putting civil rights on a ballot initiative. I don't understand that, but in any case, I wholeheartedly support trans rights and will continue to champion that. I have long championed trans rights, and I'm the very strong champion for LGBTQ equality.
Bill.
Part of my campaign, again, go to my website, is I state very unequivocally that I'm going to vote against any effort to repeal the law as it stands. I don't believe in it. I think that I have an awkwardness with this particular issue because I don't understand how we would try to judge people because of who they would choose to love. And I don't understand why we would try to judge people based upon how they would choose to express themselves. It just doesn't compute for me. But I realize that we absolutely have to, if we're going to have equal protection, if the laws are going to be fair and equally applied, then this is one of those kinds of issues for me. And in terms of what to do about it, I'm going to vote against the ballot. I'm going to continue to talk about it on the campaign trail and after. It's one of those things I just don't agree with. Thank you.
Thanks. Michelle?
I support LGBTQ rights and have attended a number of the meetings of the Lex Pride and continue to do what I can to support. I actually attended the very first organizing meeting here in Lexington when we were discussing how to combat the messaging and misinformation that's expected to come out for this campaign. We need to vote yes on this ballot question to prevent the repeal of the law. It is written in an extraordinarily confusing fashion, and that's one of the trickeries that's being used to hopefully gain traction, and we don't want to see that happen. I also have quite a few volunteers on my campaign. I have almost 30 adults and 14 or more students, it seems like, and counting every day, and am going to ask the students to help me use some of their time to do phone banking and support for the effort to make sure that we get the word out that we absolutely need to vote yes on this initiative.
Matthew?
I couldn't feel more strongly about this. I was actually the first candidate to call on my website for people to vote yes on this and to oppose this effort to strip people's rights away from them. I can't understand how that can still be happening in the modern world. Love is love. Enough of this. This has grown absolutely ridiculous. A core of why I'm running is that all people need to be treated equally, that we need to treat each other with respect. This violates every component of what that stands for. So I have been working with, I'm going to continue to try to work with local groups. I've been working with the sort of statewide group that's been pushing on this as well, the Vote Yes campaign there. And I'm going to continue to do so. We have to do everything we can to make sure that all people are treated fairly and equally.
Thanks. Joe?
Thank you. I am voting yes for this. I think we all should be supporting it. Years and years ago, to date myself, at Minuteman, when I was a school resource officer, the first Gay-Straight Alliance was created. No longer called that. It's certainly matured a long way since the GSA days. It was agonizing to walk through the cafeteria, to walk through the school and see questioning individuals. Didn't know where to turn, where to go to be safe, where to voice what they were feeling inside. And I offered them my office. My office as a school resource officer, as a police officer, was a safe place. You could come there, you could meet, and from there it took off. I'm proud of that. I want to see it continue. I'd do anything I could to support people and make sure that they feel safe in themselves and express themselves.
Thank you. Next question. Bill, you get to be the first one to respond here. What should be the future of educational testing in the Commonwealth? What should change? What should remain?
So I believe in educational testing, right?
I'm sorry? Sure. What should be the future of educational testing in the Commonwealth? What should change? What should remain? Sorry, Bill.
No, that's fine. So I do believe in educational testing. I don't believe how it's being applied makes a whole lot of sense. It can't be used to target sort of something as small as a classroom. You can't possibly think that a test score like that should be an indication of like a teacher performance. And so that type of targeted use, and I forget there's a name for the high performance testing, so I don't understand that application of it and would think that we need to, big data and data can be used inappropriately. And when this type of data is used that way, it's an inappropriate use of that data, and there are things that we can do in order to curtail it and sort of remove systematic uses of the data to program them into things like formula funding and teacher salaries and the rest. But I will say, having the data in the aggregate statewide and to look at trends so that we know where to focus and how to use the data appropriately, there are legitimate uses for the data, so we should continue testing. So let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Thank you. Michelle?
So I would not claim to be an expert on testing. I do know that too frequently we teach to the test and we stress our children out by too much of a focus on the test itself. And I don't think that's healthy for any of our kids. I don't think it's healthy for our teachers. Too much of an emphasis is spent on the scores and the data in trying to rank different schools, and I don't know that that's ultimately productive. However, I also think that it's not the kind of thing that can be micromanaged. The experts in education need to look at this more carefully, perhaps form a commission and come to some kind of consensus about what needs to be changed and what should be kept. But at the end of the day, I do think the focus should be on the child and the educational and emotional learning and not on test taking.
Matthew?
This is pretty important to me. I've got 2 young kids just starting out in the schools. Actually, my daughter will be taking the MCAS exam soon if nothing happens with that, so I'm pretty interested in this question. But I'd like to see a greatly reduced role for the value of standardized testing in this system. I think instead, as noted, it leads to the teaching to the test. Instead of real broad knowledge and independent thinking, this is not what we should be aiming for in the educational system. To that end, actually, during this campaign, I was lucky enough to actually run into one of my elementary school teachers, and still lives in Lexington. One of my favorite teachers, as good a teacher as you could ever hope for, but it was in part because he had real flexibility to teach interesting topics in innovative ways. He knew not every student is served best by the same thing being done for everybody over and over again. The standardized tests give a lot less room for that to take place. I want to see a lot more of his style of teaching, a lot less of, standardized testing.
Joe?
I remember watching my 8th grade son take the MCAS test and thinking to myself, boy, I'm glad I didn't have to take that. When I was on the school council, Principal Amara at the time was very, very concerned about the standardized testing and the way we were educating our kids in general. His concern, and this is a man with decades of education who's now doing oceanography and studying whales, is an incredibly smart man, was concerned that we were teaching kids to memorize and repeat, not to inspire creativity, not to actually measure intelligence, not to tell people this is how you survive in life. Standardized testing to me is something that I haven't seen much success in, and I would like to see it greatly changed.
Thank you, Joe. Mary Ann?
A few years ago, I gave public testimony in the State House about support for a moratorium on standardized testing, high stakes, because the high stakes nature of these tests mean that kids can't graduate from high school. It means that, schools get classified as low performing, which is important to understand where those gaps are, but it's not because of the results on a test. I think we've outlived the just testing. We need to stop for a while to really take a look and study the impact of what all of this testing is doing in classrooms and in schools. I know for sure that it does suck the joy right out of a classroom when so much time is spent in a year focusing on the standardized test, and you give up so much time for specialists, for arts, for phys ed, for music. It's just because the teachers have to go and proctor the tests and watch other classes and help administer the paper test and the computer test. So I would support a moratorium.
Thank you. Michelle, you get to answer the next question first. Keeping track of this is challenging. As it has for the past several sessions, the legislature that you would serve in will be asked to vote on an act relative to end-of-life options. Legislation sometimes referred to as medical aid in dying, or less appropriately, physician-assisted suicide. Do you support such legislation, and why or why not?
I definitely support this legislation and was pleased that the Lexington Board of Selectmen endorsed it. I don't think we should be prolonging people's suffering. There was some concern in the early stages of the development of this legislation that it might encourage inappropriate behavior from relatives who wanted to speed up a relative's demise because of the care and cost, and those provisions have been removed, and there are protections in there to make sure that that doesn't happen. The bill as it currently stands is sound and is humane and is the right thing to have available to someone who is in deep suffering.
Thank you. Matthew?
Yes, I would in the end support this legislation. I think, of course, we all have reservations when it comes to things like this. There's always that feeling if things are going to go wrong. But yes, I do support this legislation. This is a decision that should be made between doctor and patient. This is not a decision for others to be involved in. I don't think the government should be telling people that they have to continue suffering. I don't think that is an appropriate role of government. So, yes, in the end, I would support this.
Yes, I totally agree, Matthew. I can't say it better than doctor and patient, and that's where it should end. Watching somebody suffer is not something that anybody should have to do. And there are wrinkles right now in the system with DNRs and what happens at end of life that can be improved upon vastly. I've seen it. I hated dealing with it then. Anything to make that situation better, make it a more humane way of doing things is something I'm in favor of.
Mary Ann?
I support it. I think it's a form of compassionate care and empathy. I think that we are moving in that direction anyway, and I know that a lot of people want to have that as an option.
Thank you. And Bill?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I sat in hospice with my uncle 2 years ago, and he was able to progress towards a very sort of dignified end in that he chose for himself. And so we can't take those types of decisions out of people's hands. And more to the point, I think, of the legislation and the question, we have to find ways to empower people to recognize that they can make that choice and do what we need to do to support, again, their choice with their doctor, with their family, in the way that they would choose to go and have that experience in that end. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is painful for me to ask because there's a handful of questions I'm not going to get to ask. But here goes. And it's Matthew's turn to go first. Do you support a single-payer healthcare system?
I think the answer to that is if we can come up with a good model for a single-payer healthcare system, then yes, I would support a single-payer healthcare system. I have some concerns about what that would entail. I think above anything else, of course, the goal of our entire healthcare system should be to ensure that everybody gets the care they need when they need it. That's the absolute key to this system. It is a fundamental human right. But how we get there is where it becomes tricky. It's going to be a long path to get single payer. I would love to be a part of working on that. I spent over 7 years at the State House working on healthcare. So this is a topic of deep importance to me. But if we're going to create this kind of program, we have to be sure that it actually provides the care that's needed, that it is cost effective, and that really the government is going to be capable of running this type of setup. And if we can assure those things, absolutely yes. And I would absolutely love to go back to the State House and work more on this type of issue. I love working on healthcare issues, so absolutely. Thank you.
Joe?
You kind of ran out of time, so I'll continue that. If the government is capable, is where I want to pick up. The Registry of Motor Vehicles is very capable of creating long lines. Very, very capable of it. I'm very, very concerned and cautious about a single-payer system where you would be limited to one option and only one option. In the town of Lexington, we're subscribers as employees and as retirees to the GIC. The GIC, when it came in, was awful. It was just awful. We went from Blue Cross to a different health insurance to a different health insurance to a limit of, I believe we have now 2 and maybe 2.5 options in the GIC. Let the government run the registry. They already have it. Let's be very cautious about single payer.
Mary Ann?
We're seeing that the road to health care for all is long, but it is absolutely where we must end up because it improves people's lives and it saves money. So we know that over 20% of prescriptions go unfilled because individuals can't afford the medicine. And a system like Healthcare for All, if it's Medicaid or Medicare, will save us bargaining power with greedy drug companies. It'll improve quality of comprehensive physical, mental, and dental health care at reduced cost. High quality health care is a basic right. Full access to comprehensive health care includes reproductive health care for women's cancer prevention, screening, and treatment. I support a publicly administered option that reduces costs. We also need expanded access to dental care and treat opioid and heroin epidemics as public health crises. In healthy communities, children are more likely to be born healthy, and they can grow and be healthy adults. When people are healthy, they're better able to reach their full potential and make lasting contributions to society. Health is influenced by a variety of complex factors, such as where one lives, access to healthy foods, and affordable of health care. So I look forward to working on this issue.
And
Ready to go? Okay.
I'm just
So,
looking where I am on
folks,
my
we
list
could
here, so.
talk about this for
I see where
hours,
I am.
right?
Okay.
So let me try to do this as sort of succinctly as I can. Even if you don't think that healthcare is a right, I have to believe you think it's the right thing to do to treat sick people. Now that sounds like a great, that's an ideal, right? How do we get there? I watched with great interest as Vermont undertook as a state to try to do that, to try to do the right thing. It was a very interesting experiment that didn't pan out, but there are tremendous lessons that we have coming from that to learn how to do this on the state level. I do not want us as Massachusetts to relearn those mistakes. However, I believe there is an opportunity to work with a state like Vermont, clearly like-minded and clearly committed to the same goal of healthcare for all. They're also doing something very interesting with prescription drugs and trying to buy them from Canada. We can partner. So I think as a region, we should take it on. I don't think we can or should go it alone as a state. Thank you.
Michelle, you get the last word on single payer.
So I do think we need to move to a single-payer system. It won't be easy, and we have to do it in a very careful and deliberate fashion. But other industrialized nations do it, and they do it very effectively, and they have high-quality health care for all. And I think that's something we need to strive for. In Massachusetts, mass health takes up 40% of the budget, and it's growing at a faster rate than our revenues are growing. So this is something that we have to address. However, we also have a very important biotech and medical industry in our economy, and quite a few people employed in the health insurance industry. Moving too quickly could be very disruptive and create job losses. So we have to be very deliberate about how we approach this. I think the right way to do it is to make sure all voices are at the table, putting solutions together collaboratively to make sure that it's a process that will work for everyone.
Thanks, Michelle. Do I have your permission to ask one more question before we go to summaries? Okay. I'm not asking them, you're running for office. So. Given that collegiality is really important at the State House, what in your background and your experience prepares you to work with your colleagues, and in particular, how do you balance working with them, working with the so-called leadership of the House, and the needs of your constituency? I asked that question having no good answer for it. Joe, you get to go first.
It's hard to say no to me. It's really, really hard to say no to me. I was a union president for 10 years in Lexington. I got elected to the National Board of Directors of our executive union, 50,000-man union, by negotiating very, very deftly and very collaboratively. I got hired by our company, Newpath, in Woburn, primarily to negotiate a contract with a 350-man union. This is negotiations when you don't have any authority over the person that you're negotiating with. As a union president, you're negotiating with the town manager. You don't have authority over the town manager. You need to figure out, how do I communicate on the same level from totally different perspectives? I want as much money as I could possibly get. The town manager wants to give me nothing. Absolutely nothing. So how do you do that? You make eye contact. You learn each other's mannerisms, and you work cooperatively to understand that you both have to stay in business. In order for me to survive, the town has to survive. The same principles will apply in negotiations at the State House, my opinion.
Thanks, Joe. Marianne?
Many of you know that I've been on the PTA and many levels, local, state, and national, for many years. There are a variety of ideologies. It's a nonpartisan organization, and I was actively involved in those organizations, association, for 15 years. I also say, and we made a lot of progress advocating for children. The PTA is not the fundraising arm of the Department of Education. It is the largest volunteer child advocacy association in the country. And I was very proud to work side by side with all different ideologies to get progress for children, youth, and families. I'll also say that I've been a community activist for many years, advocating for these issues, workers' rights, LGBTQ equality, et cetera. And you have to be able to work with others, both inside the State House with legislators, and outside the State House as well with colleagues and other advocates. So that's some of what I bring.
Bill?
So I think the secret to it is you need to find out what's important to them and their constituency and compare it to what's important to the folks that you represent, and you start to build together towards the common goals. I personally believe that there is no escaping the need to do more and important things with regard to education. Hopefully you guys, if you're not going to take away anything tonight, that's one, right? The debt market hunger needs to not be slacked. We need to do something different there. I believe that all across the Commonwealth, that's a commonly held belief, and we're going to find the other folks who believe in that have sent their representatives that believe in that, and we're going to partner with them. We're going to do the same thing when it comes to constituencies like yourself who believe that we need to have more solar and more wind. Then we need to not let the utility companies dictate the things that they're doing over at DPU, and we're going to partner on that. And then we're going to make sure, and I believe that there maybe there's a leadership change coming, and we're going to make sure that you guys have the right folks in there so that we support the right leaders so that we can get things done on those and the other important issues. Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle.
So Lexington has 200 elected town meeting members and hundreds of committees. So I know firsthand how difficult it is to actually move something through the process and to get things voted on and enacted. It's not easy, but one of the things you do is you start by listening very actively and asking all voices to participate. One of the things I'm particularly proud of is, as a Lexington selectman, I frequently go to groups in our community and invite them to participate. I go to them in their home turf, like the Indian Americans of Lexington, the Chinese American Association of Lexington. I go to them, I recruit them to be on boards and committees, I ask them to run for office. And we've had great success here in Lexington bringing diverse voices to our government to participate. I also was known in Hudson, where I worked, as the head of the Impossible Projects Division. That was what my boss used to call me, because I was assigned the very difficult things of working with the butters and people who might be angry over something, and working through the process, hearing their concerns, improving the project, and getting things done.
Matthew.
I've done it. I was at the State House for over 7 years as a research and budget director. I have built this kind of consensus, and you're right, it's not always such an easy thing. I would certainly agree with that. But I've done it with the people who are currently in leadership, many of them. I've done it with the current speaker. I overlapped with him. I know how to work with the people who are currently there. And, I've worked with the interest groups, lobbying groups. I've sometimes stood up to those groups, depending on what side we found ourselves on. But, I think a key to all of this is you should never take a purely ideological approach. You want to study and learn about issues, formulate policies that will work. You can be firm without being inflexible. You got to find that right balance. And to that end, I always sought input from liberals, progressives, moderates, conservatives, Democrats, and Republicans. I would do the same if I were elected, because I know no one can get anything done alone in the legislature. You need to build those relationships.
Thank you. We're now at the last segment of this, which is an opportunity for each of you to offer us a minute of closing thoughts. And we will begin with Mary Ann.
Thanks. Sorry, I got it wrong. I have been thinking a lot about this race, and I'm taking it very seriously. Democracy is messy. You can't be all about doing things right. You have to lead with your values to do the right things. The State House is full of lawyers and business people, managers and consultants, and I believe that we will be better served with more activists in the House, people who will stand up and speak out for change, as I have been doing for years. There's 160 legislators in the House. Each and every one of them knows how to file legislation, but only a few dozen are actually pushing for the right things. Healthcare for all, safe communities, energy and the environment, comprehensive sex education, eliminating conversion therapy. I've been pushing for the right things for years from outside the State House, defeating reckless ballot questions, raising the minimum wage, supporting LGBTQ rights, working to pass overrides, and electing progressives to the State House, initiating the Fair Share Amendment. I'm the candidate who is strongest on public education, nearly 12 years, school committee, board of ed, national boards and working groups. And now I want to push for change from inside the State House. We're at a critical time. We need to invest in our communities. Affordable health care and housing is a human right. And I want to be in the State House and work with energy, and credibility, integrity, and guts. And that's why I ask for your vote on Tuesday, September 4th. Thank you.
Michelle has corrected me, and in the instructions or in the guidelines for this, I had offered the candidates a minute and a half. I know you ran over the minute, but you were entitled to do that. And so it's a minute and a half. Stick with the original rules. Thank you. Bill?
Thanks, folks. I don't think I'm what you'd call a politician. I've never run for office before. I certainly have a set of beliefs, and I've tried to communicate them to you here tonight. I think we as a Commonwealth undoubtedly are going to face issues around transportation. I think we're undoubtedly going to face issues around education. And we are undoubtedly going to face issues around how do we produce clean energy and how do we leverage that into jobs. And those are the things that I think we're all going to confront together, and those are the things that I stand for. Now, I think that there are kind of two things happening here. I have an extremely, what I would call, progressive view when it comes to those issues. And I believe that there's some uniqueness in that I sort of carry those views with a long history of being successful in business. And most of the things that I just talked about are going to require us to do things like tax folks where the majority of their income is their money working for them. And if we want to do the right things on the environment, we are absolutely going to have business at the table. And I bring some uniqueness of experience there. When I was in the legislature as part of the taxation committee working for Peter Larkin, we passed the brownfields legislation. And I don't mean it got passed when I happened to be there. I mean that representative and us on his staff got it passed. So I have the right experience there. I have the right experience in the private sector, and I believe I'm the right person for the challenges that we're going to face. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle.
I can't sum up my extensive career in 90 seconds, but I can say that the issues I've worked on have been comprehensive and broad, and I've achieved tangible, award-winning results. I want to use my experience and knowledge and my creative problem-solving ability to make Massachusetts stronger. In Lexington, we have a long tradition of community engagement and good government. As your selectman, I'm proud of what we're able to achieve together. I want to take our shared values to the State House to advance a progressive agenda that puts people back in the center of decision-making and moves us forward in a practical and deliberate way. With strong collaboration and focus, we can build a more inclusive society where everyone feels welcome. Strategically over time, we can make smart investments to improve our educational system from pre-K through college. We can lead the country on environmental issues by demanding clean energy and carbon use reduction. We can create a reliable, coordinated transportation system that moves people seamlessly and provides better bicycling and walking options. We can have healthier residents by providing comprehensive preventative care and widely available mental health services. Papers are tricky. Finally, and most importantly, we can stay away from the national vitriol and instead bring people together again to collaborate for a more prosperous future. I would be honored to receive your vote.
Thank you. Matthew.
It's been an honor to be here with these other great candidates. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to speak with all of you. I feel that I will be an effective voice for our community and its needs. Based on strong principles and your input, I will make your voices heard. The parents who want the best public education for their children, the seniors who cannot afford to stay in their homes, the workers who deserve a fair wage, those who are addicted or have a family member suffering from drug or alcohol addiction, our minority populations with their diverse needs, those concerned about the devastating impact of climate change or rising healthcare costs, and for each and every person in this district and this Commonwealth. I want this job because I want to work for you. I am committed to improving life for all residents in this great Commonwealth. The only way that you can address people's needs is to talk with the people. That's why I want to hear from every single person in this district. And look for me at your door, by the way. But I am the candidate with the most relevant experience, the proven ability to think outside the box, the passion to get this job done right, and to do all that from day one. I will always strive to make your lives better. And I promise to keep working hard to earn your vote on September 4th. And I hope to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe.
Last word, right?
No, I get the last word.
Can say anything oh, damn. All right, fine.
For the next 6 months, I get the last word.
Yes, you do. Thank you all very much for being here. And these are fantastic people. All four of the people that are up here with me are fantastic. I'd be honored to have your vote on September 4th. I was a police officer. I was a coach. I work at New Path with people with disabilities. I'm humbled just to be up here now I've got a lot of common sense. I have a statement I'm supposed to read, and my common sense is telling me not to read it. I've been in this town. I know most of you. Most of you know who I am. I've seen all the streets. I've driven the community. I know we need to get some changes made. We need common sense at the State House. A lot of people don't have Jay's common sense up there, and they need some shared with them. I want to bring it up there. My name is Joe Lahiff. I'm running for state rep, and I would appreciate your vote on September 4th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. So let's applaud to all the candidates, okay? So I don't know how many of you are leaving here with a clear idea of who you're going to vote for, and how many of you are leaving here with the sense that we've got 5 candidates who bring different skills, different backgrounds, different personalities, but there's not a bad choice up here. So we're in remarkably great shape as a community, and I'm very grateful for the 5 of you for being willing to step forward and offer your leadership and service to all of us. I also want to thank Alejandra and Brad, who are sitting in the middle with the hopeless task of keeping us on task. And then Michelle and Nicole for the hopelessly difficult job of sorting out some of the questions. And then young intern Alan from my office this summer, who's been helping out with all the logistics. So thanks to this incredible staff that I get to work with. Thanks to all of you as interested voters in the community. Have a good summer, and we'll be back with Open House in September. But before that, you've got to vote. It's September 4th.